Good evening. You know, one of the fundamental principles of the Baha'i faith is unity in diversity. It is a principle around which our faith is organized. And it proclaims the triumph of our unity in our differences. It is so startling when we hear such a unique cultural perspective, as Kevin Locke has just shared with us, which is so different from what most of us know, but which rings so good and true with the best we have come to understand. We see the strength that it brings to our own humanity, how it reinforces the best of what we can be. And it comes from a voice that most of us are unfamiliar with. I want to just pause for a moment and say from the bottom of my heart how grateful I am to my brother Kevin for singing in his clear and spiritually guided and resolute voice this song, which is so beautiful and so touching to us all, and which is such a cause of our inspiration and transcendence. This, I think, gives us a foretaste of what it will be like when the whole of humanity has learned to sing in harmony, and when each of us can raise our voices in a song of common prayer and love. We will hear a melody of unusual beauty. This evening, we have heard melodies of unusual beauty, and we have heard them in a way that resonates with the best in our hearts. Let us join me, please, and acknowledge this gift that we've been given. Glenn told you that I live in Chicago, but in truth, I'm not sure that anyone who has ever lived in Atlanta can say that they're from someplace else. You know, they call Atlanta L.A., lovely Atlanta. And it is true because it is a place for the body and the spirit. In many ways, it is cosmopolitan. In many ways, it brings together people of diverse backgrounds. But in other ways, the dogwoods in spring, the jungle magnolia in the rainforests north of here, the lovely mountains, it calls forward those spiritual characteristics which we prize. And I'm very happy that we could organize this conference for this place, particularly in the shadow of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which has been the site of such historic events, and perhaps the spiritual center of the movement toward racial equality in this country. I've been asked to say a few words this evening on the principal theme of this conference, the creation of models of racial unity. At the outset, I would simply like to establish a context in which to understand why we chose the topic, models of racial unity. It seemed to us that we have stalled in our efforts to establish equality and understanding among the diverse peoples of this nation, and especially between black people and white people. And one aspect of our halted progress is the negative orientation that many times characterizes the discussion of the reconciliation of the hearts of peoples of different colors. It further seemed to us that it was necessary for us to build on strength, to move from strength to strength, and that a thorough, systematic, and careful examination of models of unity and cooperation was appropriate at this time, so that we might understand, in the context of institutions, institutional practices, individual behavior, habitual patterns of thought, developing cultural norms, where these examples of racial unity are and how we can use them to further educate ourselves and take these models back to our community and replicate them. So this is the context in which this conference has been called. I wanted to say to you at the outset that we come from a rich tradition in this country of people who have seen the vision early on that we were never intended to be divided, but intended to be one. Let us look back. Back to July 4th, 1827, when slavery was officially ended in New York State. On the following day, the Reverend Nathaniel Paul, pastor of the African Baptist Society, called a meeting of the black and white people of that community, many of whom had worked together to hasten the day when the emancipation of slavery would occur in New York State. He called a meeting of celebration, and at that meeting, he talked about the important achievement of the emancipation of slaves in New York. He reflected on the vision of equality and freedom and justice for all that inspired the founding fathers at the conception of the American nation. And he forecast that our job would not be done until slavery had been abolished, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, and when brotherhood and sisterhood, a sense of all of God's children belonging to the same family, had been firmly established. To that congregation, gathered in prayer and celebration, he said in part, "We look forward with pleasing anticipation to that period when it shall no longer be said that in a land of free men there are men in bondage, but when this foul stain will be entirely erased, and this worst of evils will be forever done away. The progress of emancipation, though slow, is nevertheless certain. It is certain because that God who has made of one blood all nations of men, and who is said to be no respecter of persons, has so decreed. I therefore have no hesitation in declaring from this sacred place that not only throughout the United States of America, but throughout every part of the habitable world where slavery exists, it will be abolished. However great may be the opposition of those who are supported by the traffic, yet slavery will cease. The lordly planter, who has had his thousands in bondage, may stretch himself upon his couch of ivory and sneer at the exertions which are made by the humane and benevolent. Or he may take his stand upon the floor of Congress and mock the pitiful generosity of the East and West for daring to meddle with the subject and attempting to expose its injustice. He may threaten to resist all efforts for a general or a partial emancipation, even to the dissolution of the Union. But still I declare that slavery will be extinct. A universal and not a partial emancipation must take place, nor is that period far distant. The indefatigable exertions of the philanthropists in England to have it abolished in their West India islands the recent revolutions in South America, the catastrophe and exchange of power in the Isle of Haiti, the restless disposition of both master and slave in the southern states, the constitution of our government, the effects of literary and moral education, the generous feelings of the pious and the benevolent, the influence and spread of the holy religion of the cross of Christ and the irrevocable decrees of Almighty God, all combine their efforts with united voice to declare that the power of tyranny must be subdued, that the captive must be liberated, the oppressed go free, and that slavery must revert back to its original chaos of darkness and be forever annihilated from this earth. In 1827, Nathaniel Paul had that vision. 36 years later, his prophetic vision was partially fulfilled. In the midst of the Civil War, claiming as it did more lives than the sum total of all of the wars fought since by this nation, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, and the slaves in those states in revolt were freed. Some 500,000 from the North and South joined the battle to secure the union of the nation and the equality of all of its peoples. At the same time, in Persia, now Iran, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, came to renew the age-old promise of religion. And he said about his own mission and the fundamental and guiding purpose of all religions that the faith of God and his religion is to safeguard the interests and promote the unity of the human race and to foster the spirit of love and fellowship amongst men. Baha'u'llah called all of the religious leaders and the rulers to a new level of collective responsibility for the well-being of the whole of mankind. He said, now is the time to bind the wounds of all of the ill. He explained to them that these bloody wars that have led the world to the brink of disaster had at their foundation prejudice of race, prejudice of class, prejudice of sex, prejudice of religion, and that now was the time to build a new kind of civilization based on one fundamental and guiding principle, and that is the oneness of humankind. Baha'u'llah said to the leaders at that time that the well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is established. The unity that he spoke of was not an idealistic dream, but in the view of Baha'is, an inevitability as a part of the continuing evolution of humankind. The Baha'i writings explain that the principle of the oneness of mankind is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. Its appeal is not to be merely identified with a reawakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men, nor does it aim solely at the fostering of harmonious cooperation among individual peoples and nations. Its message is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all the states and nations as members of one human family. It does not constitute merely the enunciation of an ideal. It implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world world has not yet experienced. The Baha'i faith regards the current world confusion, the calamitous condition of human affairs, as a natural phase in the organic process leading ultimately and irresistibly to the unification of the entire human race. Prejudice, war, exploitation have been expressions of the immature stages, say the Baha'i writings, in the vast historical process of human evolution. They further advise that the current tumult, which has visited the human condition, can be seen as the collective coming of age of humanity, should not be a reason for despair, but a prerequisite to understanding the stupendous enterprise of building a peaceful world. 100 years later, here in Atlanta and throughout the South, in 1963, a movement was sweeping the nation. In retrospect, we might say that that movement was the continuation of that same Civil War. It was a dramatic breakthrough in the struggle for racial equality and justice. It represented one of the most significant turning points in the history of this country, and another evidence that humanity is edging ever closer to the spiritual imperative of unity and oneness, the law of the new age. Martin Luther King was at the center of that struggle. He inspired a generation with a vision of race unity which propelled the movement to achieve unprecedented social change in virtually every quarter of the society. Now we stand here 27 years later. Now we have a holiday which bears the name of Martin Luther King. But in many ways we have lost the generation which feels his passion and is determined to fulfill his vision. The dream of the great society has given way to the nightmare of the underclass. The vision of racial unity has been blurred by carelessness and apathy. As we survey the current conditions of the struggle for freedom and equality and brotherhood, we find carelessness, apathy, only some of the aspects which mark our condition. We find that far from there being more understanding, a higher level of unity, that there is a resurgence of racial bias, that the dream of equality and brotherhood seems to be slipping away. We look at the college campuses, which once were spawning grounds for the movement toward social justice and brotherhood, and we see that now, in too many cases, there are arenas for racial violence and platforms for the doctrines of racial separation and hatred. We see to our dismay that during the decade of the 80s, there was a 300% increase in hate crimes. We look at the economic measures of our efforts to achieve equality, and we are further dismayed and disheartened. We see that the economic disparity created by prejudice and racism, which holds advantage for some, but denies access to others to gain the means of existence and to maintain their own sense of human dignity, further strains our collective relations. And if we were to look at some of the social measures that tell us in various aspects of life what degree of equality we have achieved, we may become truly disheartened. We look at the racial parity index, which measures the degree of distance, and ask the question, how many years will it take for us to achieve the equality of black people and white people in this nation? And we see that it will take approximately 73 more years for the black people in America to achieve equality with the white people of America in their earnings. We see that with regard to family income, at the current rate of progress toward equality, we will never get there. Equality will never be achieved. That indeed, when we compare the family income of black American families and white American families, not only are we not progressing toward equality, we are actually losing ground. We look at the relative rates of poverty between black people and white people, and we see to our disgust that it will take 169 years for black people to achieve the current level of poverty of their white counterparts. And we look at the areas of employment, of education, of managerial appointments, of graduation from high school and college. And we see that in those areas, we will either never achieve equality at the current rate of progress, or equality is 1/2 to 3/4 of a century down the road. We know that this is not enough. Then we look at the levels of social interaction between black people and white people in this country, and we find to our dismay that far from having been inspired by generations of lofty ideals, far from having and we may truly become disheartened. This must stand as one of the important reasons why all of us here must look carefully at the development and the replication of models of racial unity, because we cannot abide further decline. We stand on the brink of the upset of the social order of America itself. These imbalances, which characterize black and non-white and poor people and women in this country, are reflective of the absence of the spiritual principle of unity, of equality and oneness. They will not be remedied by social initiatives alone, but they can be remedied by a sense of urgency that expresses itself in social action, and by concerted effort to transform ourselves spiritually, to reshape our characters, to raise generations of children who see a new vision, who have new attitudes and points of view and skills with which to build a united and cohesive society. In the Baha'i faith, the unity of black people and white people is seen as one of the most important objectives of our faith. The American Baha'i community specifically is assigned the priority. It is referred to as the most challenging and vital issue. The American Baha'i community is specifically challenged to pursue this priority and to establish this as the standard in the land. This is the sense of urgency that we seek to convey to all of our fellow citizens, because nothing less than this sense of urgency will enable us to overcome the resistance of institutions and of careless and apathetic hearts. Would that it was so easy that all the hearts were only careless and apathetic. In many cases, the hearts are becoming increasingly hostile. We think that the transformation of every level of society and individual life is necessary. And the Baha'i writings indicate that the unity of black people and white people is symbolic and perhaps can be seen as a ransom, which we pay to achieve the unity of all people. The writings clearly state that this is one of the fundamental and indispensable links to establishing a peaceful world. And so the Baha'i writings, and in the spirit of those writings, the architects of this conference have raised a call to action to educators, to political leaders, to the clergy, to the justice system officials, to social leaders, and to individual citizens, saying to them that it is not sufficient to be concerned or to confine your efforts to the elimination of prejudice in your personal life. This is a problem, a disease, an imbalance that attacks the foundation of the society itself, and in every part of the world is seen to be manifesting its destabilizing influence on every society. We must take a wholehearted approach to the reshaping of our institutions, to the reshaping of ourselves, and to the raising of children who can live and work in a pluralistic society. The Baha'i writings indicate that if long-cherished ideals or certain social assumptions, if institutions cease to promote the welfare of the generality of humankind, if they cease to advance the civilization, then they should be swept away and relegated to the limbo of obsolescent and forgotten doctrines. We are calling on you in the spirit of this call of Baha'u'llah to join us and help us build models of racial unity. The Baha'i writings indicate that individual action alone is insufficient, that we must act in unity, and we must attack every level of our society. The writings say that what profit is there? What profit is there in agreeing that universal friendship is good and talking of the solidarity of the human race as a grand ideal? Unless these thoughts are translated into the world of action, they are useless. The wrong in the world continues to exist just because people talk only of their ideals and do not strive to put them into practice. If action took the place of words, then the world's misery would soon be changed into comfort. We have been in a long period of inaction. This conference represents a call to action of all of the citizens of this nation and beyond. There are good signs. There are increasing signs of the recognition of the need for change in business organizations, in the judiciary, in education. But more is done. More is needing to be done. During the 1990s, fully 85% of all new entrants into the workforce will be black or Hispanic or women or immigrants. We must begin to look at how we will accommodate these new entrants and how we will reshape the fundamentals of our society. We must initiate national programs which teach our children and ourselves the oneness of mankind, which give us the tools for resolving our conflicts, teach us the principles of mediation, of consultation, so that we can live and work in a pluralistic society. We must foster the development of values which are fundamentally religious and spiritual in character to overcome those values which are fundamentally materialistic. Materialistic values are a breeding ground for prejudice. They foster conflict and an unhealthy aspect of competition. They must be overcome through the development of spiritual values, the tried and true ones of honesty and truthfulness and justice and fairness, of steadfastness and reliability, of trustworthiness. These are the values that we must cultivate in our own hearts, in our lives, in our patterns of thought, in our spiritual aspirations, and must infuse in the routine practices of our institutions, and in the hearts and minds, the opinions and attitudes, the behaviors, the orientations of our children. At the foundation of this change, there must be a coming together of all of our peoples. During that movement in the 60s and 70s, when we were so successful in desegregating the lunch counter, in desegregating the classroom, even if it was on a bus, of desegregating the work site, of changing the laws of this country and many aspects of the operations of its citizens and institutions, we fell too short because we failed to desegregate the kitchen table. We failed to desegregate the living room sofa, where friendships are made and where loving is done, where people come together, where they build bridges of understanding, and where new family is created. And because we failed to do that, we did not reap the benefits that coming together, that new level of unity, that new level of strength and capacity brought by the unity in diversity of our peoples. And we did not grow spiritually. Martin Luther King told us during his life that we can't expect to solve these problems without close contact. He said that in life, racial understanding is not something that we can find, but something that we must create. And so the ability of Negroes and whites to work together, to understand one another, will not be found ready-made. It must be created by the fact of contact. In the Baha'i writings, there are further indications of the sensitivities we must develop and the skills we must sharpen in order to solve this problem. Addressing both blacks and whites, the writings say, let neither of them think that anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, consummate tact, sound initiatives, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. The fundamental goal of all of these efforts is the transformation of the character of the individual. It is the fundamental prerequisite to the transformation of the character of the society itself. In the Baha'i writings, we are called to daily prayer, to study of the spiritual teachings and principles of the Baha'i faith, and to a persistent effort of the expression of our understanding of those teachings and principles in our lives, in the development and operation of our families, in the building of our communities, and in the raising of our children. We are taught to believe that the purpose of Baha'i life is to promote the oneness of mankind, and that in our struggle for salvation, we see that it is not individual salvation we seek, but universal salvation that is our aim. That we strive to create a civilization which is characterized by those same qualities of genuine love, of unity, of the unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind, on which a new order, a new world order, can be built. And finally, the Baha'i writings indicate that once the American people have successfully moved to eliminate the prejudice and inequality which inhibit the full expression of our commitment to brotherhood and justice, our nation will be in an enviable position to proclaim the solidarity, the unity, and the maturity of the whole human race, and to lay the cornerstone of a universal and lasting peace on earth. At that time, when we have healed our wounds and found the ways to build a new order of unity and oneness, of justice and equality, I do believe that the Reverend Nathaniel Paul and the good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King will join us as we sing for the last time, "We Shall Overcome," and as we prepare to raise our voices in a new song, a song of freedom, a song of oneness, and a song of unity. Thank you.